Montana Territory, July 1881. Mud clung to her bare feet like it wanted to keep her. But she ran anyway through pine needles and sharp rocks, through the thick silence of the Bitterroot woods. The iron cuff still hung from her left wrist, the broken chain dragging behind her like an accusation. Her dress was no more than torn rags, prison-issue canvas shredded by thorns and 3 days of rain. They had dogs, she knew. She had heard them last night. But this morning the forest was quiet. She was either free or about to die. Mara Dalton did not care which. She stumbled into a clearing, lungs burning, sun slicing through the trees. Her legs gave out and she collapsed near a fallen log. The world tilted, then steadied. For a moment, all she heard was her heartbeat and the wind in the pines. "You all right, miss?" The voice cut through the quiet like a bullet. She flinched, tried to crawl backward, but her arms gave out. A man stepped out from the trees. He wore a wide-brimmed hat and a brown duster. His horse stood behind him, reins loose. He kept his hands out empty. "I ain't gonna touch you," he said, crouching a few feet away. "Name's Vaughn Pike. I got a cabin a mile from here. You look like hell." Mara opened her mouth but coughed instead. Her throat was raw, her lips cracked and bleeding. Vaughn pulled a canteen from his belt and set it down between them. "Water, take it." She watched him a moment longer, then grabbed the canteen with shaking fingers. She drank slow, eyes locked on him. He let her finish before speaking again. "You running from something?" Mara's laugh was bitter and short. "Chain gang." "Deer Lodge Prison." Vaughn's eyes flicked to the broken cuff. "Damn. They beat women like men," she said, voice hoarse. "Worked us to the bone in that mine. I did not kill that man, but they called it murder." He did not ask for the details. He just nodded like he believed her. That stunned her more than anything. "You got a name?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then said, "Mara." "Well, Mara, I got stew on the stove and a fire going. If you come with me, you can get warm and rest. I will not try anything, I swear it." "Why?" she asked. He looked at her like it was the simplest thing in the world. "Because you need help." She stood on legs that barely held her. Vaughn stepped forward like he might catch her but stopped short. She steadied herself, then nodded once. He helped her onto the horse without touching her skin, careful and silent. The ride was slow. Every jolt made her wince, but something in her chest started to loosen. The man did not talk. He just rode beside her, guiding the horse through the trees. His cabin sat at the edge of a meadow, tucked against the woods. Smoke curled from the chimney. Chickens scratched near the porch. A dog barked but did not come close. Inside, it was warm and smelled of rabbit stew. She sat on a chair by the hearth while Vaughn disappeared into the back room. He returned with a folded dress and a blanket. "Belonged to my sister. She passed last winter," he said. "I think it might fit." Mara took the dress and nodded. "Thank you." He turned his back so she could change. The fabric was soft, the sleeves worn thin. It felt like safety. When she sat by the fire again, bowl in hand, she asked, "You live out here alone?" Vaughn stirred his stew. "Used to be me, my wife, and our boy. She died when he was 5. Ty, he is 11 now. Lives with my sister in Miles City till the school term ends." Mara looked up. "You are a father," his eyes softened. "Yeah, everything I do is for that boy." She set her bowl down, her hands shook. "I cannot stay long, they will be looking." "You can stay as long as you need," he said firmly. "You could hang for harboring me." Vaughn met her eyes, steady and sure. "I am not sending you back to that hellhole, not if you did not do what they said." "I did not," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I was a cook at a boarding house. The owner's son tried to grab me. I shoved him. He fell, cracked his head on the stove. He died. They called it rage." "Said I planned it." His jaw tightened. "You defended yourself." "They did not care. You matter to me," Vaughn said quietly. "Here you matter." Mara stared at him, unsure what to do with those words. No one had ever looked at her like that, like she was worth something. The next few days passed in a blur of sleep, food, and silence. She helped him mend a fence, chopped some kindling, stirred the stew while he cleaned out the chicken coop. It was strange how easy it felt, like her body remembered a version of life without fear. One night she found him on the porch, whittling by lantern light. You do not ask many questions, she said, sitting beside him. Figure you will tell me what you want when you are ready. She looked out into the dark. I have not been touched kindly in a long time. Vaughn set down his knife. I would never hurt you. I know, she said. Then added, that scares me more than anything. He looked at her slow and steady. You have been through hell, but you are here, you are free. She nodded, then looked at him. And you, why are you so kind to me? He hesitated. Because I see you. Mara blinked fast, her voice caught. I do not know what that means. I see how strong you are, how you keep going. I see the good in you, even if the world tried to beat it down. She stood up. Her heart beat so loud it echoed in her chest. You do not even know me. I know enough, he said. And I want to know more. She walked back inside before her knees gave out. But that night she dreamed of soft hands and a voice that said her name like it meant something. By the end of the week she was smiling more. Vaughn taught her how to ride a horse properly, how to shoot his old rifle. They foraged wild berries and checked traps. He never asked her to stay. But each night when she sat by the fire and he handed her a cup of tea, she felt something bloom where grief used to live. It was not just kindness anymore, it was something deeper. One evening as they watched the sun dip behind the trees, she said, if I stayed, would your boy hate me? Vaughn shook his head. Ty would love you, he has a good heart. And what about you? She asked, voice low. He turned toward her. I already do. Mara felt her lip tremble. She reached for his hand, and this time she did not pull away. She had escaped in rags with nothing but fear in her bones. But here, beside a cowboy with quiet eyes and a steady voice, she had found more than freedom. She had found the start of a home. The first letter came in the second week of August, tucked in a saddlebag Vaughn brought back from his ride into the valley. Dust clung to his sleeves, and his face was drawn tight from the sun, but his eyes lit when he saw Mara on the porch stoop with her knees drawn to her chest, and her hair pulled back with a bit of twine. He held the envelope out. From Miles City. She let the letter rest in her palm a moment before speaking. Your sister's handwriting, he nodded. Ty wrote inside, she says. Asked if the chickens are fat yet. You going to bring him home soon? Vaughn sat beside her, his boots scraping the porch floor. School lets out in 9 days. I'll ride out for him then. Mara traced the edge of the envelope, her thumb catching on the wax seal. You think he'll be all right with me here? He'll ask questions, Vaughn said. But he'll listen. They sat without speaking after that, the quiet stretching long and comfortable. The light shifted through the pine branches, gold and soft. A hawk wheeled overhead, the only thing moving in the sky. Later, when she stood near the stove and poured water into a basin, she said, I want to earn my keep. Vaughn glanced up from oiling his rifle. You already have, she shook her head. Not out of kindness, I mean real work, something that feeds us. He wiped his hands on a rag. What do you have in mind? I can sew, she said. Used to mend uniforms in Kansas City before everything turned. Vaughn leaned back in his chair. There's a dry goods shop in Hamilton. I make the trip once a month. I could ask if they need help. You do that, he nodded once. You say you want to work. I'll help you find a place to do it. Her jaw tightened, but not from anger. I'm not used to people believing me the first time I speak. You don't have to prove yourself to me, he said. But if you want to try, I won't get in the way. She turned back to the basin, dipping her hands into the warm water, letting the silence settle like dust on old wood. That night they shared supper at the small table by the hearth, salt pork, beans, and the last of the root cellar potatoes. She chewed slowly, her gaze lingering on the window where moths battered themselves against the glass. You ever think about leaving Montana? She asked. Vaughn set down his tin cup. Before Ty came along, I did, thought about Texas. Maybe Arizona. Why didn't you? Too many ghosts in the places I'd already been. Figured I'd raise the boy where the land still felt half wild. She nodded. I used to dream about Oregon, heard the trees are so tall you can't see the tops. You could still go, he said. Mara met his eyes, steady and calm. I wouldn't go without you. He didn't speak for a long moment. Then he said, I don't want you to. After the dishes were washed and dried and the lanterns trimmed low, she found him outside near the fence line, looking out over the meadow. Grass brushed his boots and the stars came out slow one by one. She stepped beside him close enough to feel his warmth. "I had a sister once," she said. "Younger, her name was Clara, got sick during the drought in '73. We buried her under a cottonwood tree." Vaughn didn't interrupt. "She used to braid flowers into my hair," Mara said. "Even when I told her I was too old for that kind of thing." "What happened to your folks?" he asked. "Gone before Clara was. Fever took Ma. Pa drank himself to death after she passed. The boarding house took us in." "That's where I learned to cook, clean, so." Vaughn looked away toward the tree line. "You've been carrying a lot for a long time. I don't want to carry it alone anymore." "You won't have to," he said. She reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. His skin was rough, but the touch was gentle, real, and grounding. "I want to be here when your boy comes home," she said. "You will be." And just like that, it was settled. The following morning, Mara woke before the rooster crowed and braided her hair back tight. She packed a small cloth satchel with needles, thread, and scraps of muslin. Vaughn hitched the wagon while she fed the chickens. They didn't speak much on the way into town, just the sound of the wheels rattling over stones and the crows calling from the trees. Hamilton was quiet that early, just a few wagons rolling in and a man sweeping the steps of the mercantile. Vaughn left her at the door of the dry goods store and nodded once before stepping back. Inside, the shopkeeper was a woman with streaks of silver in her braid and a gaze sharp as flint. "I heard you're looking for help," Mara said. The woman set down her ledger. "You sew?" "Yes, ma'am. You got steady hands." Mara held them up. "Yes, ma'am." The woman studied her a moment longer. "You've got eyes like someone who's been through fire. Folks with faces like that don't waste time. Come back tomorrow. We'll see what you can do." Outside, Vaughn waited with the reins looped in his hand. He tipped his hat when she approached. "Well?" he asked. She said, "Come back tomorrow." He helped her up onto the wagon seat, then climbed in beside her. "Sounds like a beginning." They rode home through falling light, the road winding between tall grasses and wide sky. The horse moved slow, and neither of them hurried it. That night, she stitched a patch into Vaughn's shirt while he read by lamplight, the room quiet but full. She didn't say it aloud yet, but she knew it now, down to the bone. She wasn't passing through anymore, she had stayed. The morning Ty came home, the wind shifted. It carried the scent of distant rain and stirred the grasses in slow, thoughtful waves. Mara stood at the edge of the porch, palms pressed to the rail, watching the trail Vaughn had taken 4 days earlier. A kettle sat cooling behind her on the stove, untouched since dawn. She'd swept the cabin twice, refolded the linens, then stepped outside because her hands couldn't stay idle any longer. The boy arrived just before midday, perched atop Vaughn's saddle, his legs longer than she expected, one boot heel missing its back iron. A canvas roll hung from his shoulder and his hat too large tilted low over one eye. He looked like his father in the way he held the reins. Loose, but ready, Vaughn dismounted first. His hand rested lightly on the boy's back as Ty swung down with the gangly grace of someone still growing into himself. Mara stepped forward, wiping her palms on her skirt. Ty didn't speak right away. He squinted up at her, not with suspicion but with the cautious measure of someone used to watching before deciding. His voice, when it came, was hoarse from trail dust. "You're the woman Pa wrote about?" "I reckon I am," she said, a beat past. Then he nodded once, not quite a smile, but not far from it either. "We still got that hound, or did the fox finally get him?" "Still got him," Vaughn said, tying off the reins. "Though he's no good for guarding. Sleeps through anything but supper." Mara stepped back as Ty hauled his pack toward the porch. "You got a name?" he asked, glancing over his shoulder. "Mara," she said. He nodded again, then disappeared through the door. The screen creaked shut behind him. Vaughn's eyes met hers. "That went easier than I figured. He's not a boy who wastes words," she said. "No," Vaughn agreed, "he's not." That evening, Mara cooked trout caught from the creek behind the ridge. Ty picked out the bones without complaint, then slipped outside with a whittling knife and a block of pine. Vaughn stayed at the table, nursing coffee gone lukewarm. "He's taller than you said," Mara said, folding the dishcloth. "He shot up this spring. My sister said he's eating like a lumberjack." "You think he minds me here?" "He minds everything at first," Vaughn said. "But he watches how folks treat each other. He'll come around." Later, as dusk settled, Mara stepped outside and found Ty sitting on the porch steps, carving in steady, quiet strokes. She sat beside him, leaving space between. "What are you making?" "Don't know yet," he said. "Sometimes it tells me halfway through," Mara nodded. "That's how cooking feels some days." He glanced at her, curious. "What's your favorite thing to make?" "Cornmeal dumplings," she said, "with beans and salt pork cooked slow." "My sister used to ask for them on her birthday." Ty didn't ask about the sister, just kept carving. "I could teach you to make them if you want." He looked down at the shavings in his lap. "Maybe," she didn't press. Just leaned back on her hands and looked up at the stars, which had started to show themselves, shy and flickering. By the week's end, a rhythm found them. Mara rose early, walked to the dry goods store twice a week, and stitched muslin dresses in the back room while the sun crossed high. She brought home coin wrapped in cotton and a needle-pricked thumb. Ty helped Vaughn repair fence rails and stack hay in the loft. Evenings, they sat on the porch, the boy carving, Mara darning socks or shelling peas, Vaughn oiling the lanterns or reading from the old newspaper scraps he brought back from town. One night after Ty had turned in, Mara lingered by the fire, her hands clasped in her lap. Vaughn rubbed his thumb along the edge of his cup, his knee brushing hers where they sat close on the bench. "I saw the way he watched you today," he said. She looked up. "You worried?" "No," he said, voice low. "I think he's trying to figure out if you'll stay." "Are you?" "I stopped wondering the day you reached for my hand." Mara drew a breath, slow and steady. "I want to build something, not just get by, not just survive. You think that's possible here, with you?" she asked. "Yes." Vaughn stood and offered his hand. She took it without hesitation. They walked out into the yard where the grass was cool beneath their feet and the sky stretched clear above. He turned to her, quiet as always, but the weight of his gaze said everything. "I want to build that too," he said. She leaned into him, her head resting against the wool of his shirt. "Then let's not waste time." He kissed her then, soft and certain, there beneath the stars where only the wind bore witness, and in that stillness she knew she was no longer just free. She was home. The first frost came early that year. Mara stood at the edge of the garden, the brittle stalks of cabbage and kale drooping under a silver crust, her breath rising in short clouds. The fields beyond had turned the color of old parchment, and the mountains wore a dusting of snow that hadn't been there the week before. She bent to snap the last of the beets from the soil, her fingers aching from the cold, then carried the bundle to the root cellar, where the dim light and earth-packed walls offered a kind of stillness she hadn't known she needed. Inside the cabin, Vaughn was bent over the table, inspecting a loose hinge from the barn door, while Ty tried to coax the hound out from under the hearth with a scrap of dried venison. "He's not budging," Ty said. "I think he's scared of the wind." "The wind won't hurt him," Vaughn replied, not looking up. Mara stepped through the door, brushing dirt from her apron. "Let him be," she said, setting the basket down. "We all have something we hide from." Ty sat back on his heels, watching her with something between curiosity and understanding. "You think animals remember things the way people do?" She knelt beside him, resting her hand against the dog's side. "Maybe not the same way. But they don't forget where it hurt." Vaughn set the hinge aside and stood, stretching his shoulders. "I'll need to ride into Victor tomorrow. Old man Huxley wants help with branding before the snow sets in." Mara straightened. "You'll be gone overnight." "Just one," he said. "Ty can stay with the Petersons. They're only 2 ridges over." "I'm too old to need minding," Ty muttered. "You're old enough to know when not to argue," Vaughn said, his tone even. Mara turned to the stove. "I'll pack you bread and jerky. You'll need it if the pass ices up." Vaughn crossed the room, touching her elbow lightly. "You don't have to fuss." "I know," she said, not moving away. That night, after Ty had gone to bed, Mara stood at the window, watching the clouds drift low over the hills. Vaughn sat behind her, his boots off, one hand resting on the table. "You ever think about marrying again?" Her voice was quiet. "I thought about it," he said. "But not until you." She turned slowly. "You mean that?" "I wouldn't say it if I didn't." She crossed the room, sat beside him, close enough their knees touched. "I've never had a proper wedding." "Would you want one?" he asked. "Only if it's to you." Vaughn took her hand, his thumb tracing the seam of her palm. "Then we'll do it our way. Simple, honest." Mara looked down at their joined hands. "Nothing borrowed, nothing blue, just the two of us and the boy." "I think that's enough," he said. She leaned against his shoulder, and they sat like that until the fire burned low. The next morning, Vaughn rode out at first light. Mara watched him disappear into the trees, then turned back toward the cabin, where Ty stood with his satchel slung over one shoulder. "Petersons say their cows do any day," he said. "I hope she calves while I'm there. You'll tell me all about it when you get back." He hesitated near the door. "You think he's really going to marry you?" "I know he is," she said. Ty studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Good." She walked him to the edge of the trail, waited until he vanished into the dip between ridges, then returned to the garden to finish clearing the vines. The day stretched long and quiet, the kind of silence that held its own weight. By nightfall, the wind had picked up. She lit the lanterns early, bolted the door, and settled into Vaughn's chair with her mending. His coat still hung near the hearth, and the smell of wood smoke clung to it. She tugged it close around her shoulders, the wool heavy and familiar. By the second day, the wind dropped, but the clouds thickened. Mara walked the fence line alone, checking for gaps the elk might have worried open. She found one post loose and spent an hour shaping a wedge from scrap wood, her fingers stiff from the cold. She returned to the cabin just as the first flakes of snow began to fall. That night, a knock came at the door. She paused at the table, the hair on her arms rising. When she opened it, Vaughn stood there, snow crusting his hat brim, cheeks windburned, eyes tired but lit with something solid. "You're late," she said. "Had to wait out a storm in the pass. Huxley's barn roof caved in. We fixed it with green pine and a prayer." She stepped aside, and he entered, stomping snow from his boots. "I was starting to worry," she said, unlacing his coat. He caught her hands. "I came straight back." Later, once the fire was high again, he pulled a small bundle from his saddlebag. "What's that?" she asked. He set it on the table, unwrapped the cloth. Inside lay a ring, plain gold, the band worn thin. "Was my mother's," he said. "I've carried it since she passed." Mara reached out, touching it gently. "You sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." She slid the ring onto her finger. It fit like it had been waiting for her. Outside, the snow fell steady and soft, covering the old tracks, making everything new. Inside, they stood together, hands clasped, hearts steady. They had known pain, both of them had walked through fire and frost and silence. But now they stood in the warmth they'd built together, and neither of them would ever be alone again. The wedding was held the day after the last snow melted off the fence posts. A warm breeze moved through the clearing behind Vaughn's cabin, stirring the dry grass and carrying the scent of thawing pine. The sky was cloudless, the riverbank soft with moss and new shoots of yarrow. They stood beneath the bare branches of an aspen, just the three of them, with Ty holding the family Bible and reading the vows in a voice steadier than his years. Mara wore a dress sewn from calico she'd pieced together through the winter, cream-colored with faded blue sprigs. Vaughn had shaved, and the neatness of his jawline made her chest ache in ways she didn't have names for. Ty hadn't asked to wear anything different, but he'd scrubbed his face raw and combed his hair flat, and that was enough. "You may say what you want," Ty had told them, clearing his throat as he flipped the Bible closed. "But don't make it long. My boots are leaking." Vaughn took her hands, calloused palms against her worn fingers, and said, "You made a home out of a place that was only ever meant to be quiet." I want to spend the rest of my life making sure it stays full. Mara looked down once, just to steady herself, then up at him with eyes that didn't waver. I never thought peace would be something I got to keep, but I have it now, with you, with him. And I'll guard it like it's gold. Ty didn't cry, not even when Vaughn ruffled his hair afterward or when Mara kissed the top of his head. But he lingered close for the rest of the day, never straying far from their side. By nightfall, the cabin glowed warm with lamplight and the smell of stew. Ty had gone to bed early, worn out from hauling logs to the fire pit and sampling honeycakes until his stomach ached. Outside, the wind had gone still. You didn't hesitate, Mara said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed as Vaughn poured water into the basin. About marrying you, he shook his head. Not once. She unlaced her boots one at a time and set them beside his. You ever think about how strange it all is? That I ended up here. I think it's the first thing that's made sense in a long time. She leaned back on the quilt, her eyes following the flicker of the lamp. I used to believe nothing stayed, not people, not safety, but this. This feels like it's going to last. Vaughn sat beside her, his hand drifting to her knee, because it will. That night, they didn't rush anything. They lay close, breath to breathe, warmth shared in quiet reverence. There was no fear in her body, only trust, and the weight of his arms around her was the kind of comfort that needed no words. Spring settled in slow and steady after that. Mara began taking in work from neighboring families, hemming, mending, altering, and soon had threads hanging from every corner of the cabin. She exchanged her stitches for eggs, flour, and sometimes stories over tea, learning the names of women who'd lived in the valley longer than she'd been alive. She never told them where she came from, but they didn't ask. They saw the way Vaughn looked at her and the way Ty followed her advice without complaint, and that was enough. Vaughn took on more work too, helping neighbors build sheds, clear brush, and break colts. He always came home before dusk, hands worn raw but eyes soft when they found hers. He called her wife like it was a prayer, not a title. Ty grew taller that summer, nearly shoulder-high to Vaughn by the time the creek ran low in August. He took to carving more seriously, trading figurines for marbles and coins at school. One evening, he gave Mara a small wooden bird, its wings outstretched. It's not perfect, he said. She ran her thumb across the feathers, each one etched with care. Nothing worth keeping ever is. By autumn, the cabin held more than it ever had, jars stacked high with preserves, shelves lined with books Vaughn brought from town, a quilt Mara had stitched with patches from all their clothes. The porch sagged a little from the weight of firewood stacked for winter, and the roof had a new patch where Ty had hammered in shingles under Vaughn's watchful eye. One evening, as the first leaves turned, Mara sat beside the fire peeling apples while Vaughn read aloud from a letter his sister had sent. Ty lay on the rug with a book of his own, the dog curled at his feet. Mara looked up, catching Vaughn's eye. "I've been thinking. That usually means I'm about to have more work," he said, folding the letter. She smiled. "I want to teach, not just Ty, other girls too, ones who never got the chance." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You've got the gift for it." "You sure you want to take on more?" "I've never been surer of anything," she said. He nodded once. "Then we'll make room, clear a space in the back shed. You can start come spring." They sat in contented silence after that, the fire crackling low, the smell of baking apples drifting from the stove. Ty had fallen asleep with his book open, his face soft in the lamplight. Vaughn reached for her hand and didn't let go. Years passed just like that, slow, steady, full of honest work and shared breath. Mara taught a handful of girls to read and sew. Vaughn raised foals and fixed fences. Ty grew into a man with his father's steadiness and his mother's stubborn heart. He carved his initials into the porch rail the day he left for Helena to apprentice with a carpenter, but he came home every season, arms full of stories and tools. Mara and Vaughn never traveled far. They didn't need to. The land around them changed with each year, more fences, new faces, but their little cabin remained, tucked against the trees, warmed by love and the strength they had built together. Every night they lay close, not out of habit but by choice. And every morning, Vaughn kissed her forehead like it was still the first time. Peace didn't come all at once. It came in pieces. The sound of Ty's laughter outside the window, the feel of Vaughn's hand against hers while they watched the sun rise, the hush that fell over the cabin after supper. Mara had once run through the woods with blood on her hands and no name worth saying. Now she had a home, a family, and a love that had never asked her to be anything but herself. She had survived. And then, slowly and fully, she had begun to live.